In this episode of Sauna Talk, I sit down with Bill Gifford, author of Hotwired, How the Hidden Power of Heat Makes Us Stronger, for a wide-ranging conversation on sauna, heat adaptation, and the connection between physical challenge and mental well-being. Bill shares how his journey into heat began through personal stress, scientific curiosity, and his reporting on the powerful effects of sauna and thermal exposure. Together, we explore the Finnish sauna research of Dr. Jari Laukkanen, the role of heat in cardiovascular and mental health, and how sauna serves as both a physiological reset and a social connector. I had Jari on the show back in 2019 and thought I knew that research well, but Bill brings new depth and backstory that I found fascinating. We also dive into Bill's experience in training for the brutal Hotter Than Hell 100 and what heat adaptation teaches about resilience and why sauna offers something far beyond simple recovery. From neurotransmitters and stress relief to friendship, veterans healing, and bathing culture, this episode shows how heat can strengthen body, mind, and spirit. I'll be honest, when Bill sent me a review copy of Hotwired, I expected to move through it fairly quickly before sitting down for this conversation. But instead, this book pulled me in. It landed at just the right time. Julie and I even have a quiet rule. No S word. It stays away from the dinner table. But the adjacencies this book explores kept drawing me in ways I think many of you will resonate with and appreciate as well. So without further ado, let's welcome Bill Gifford to Sauna Talk. A funny story. The Sauna Times Substack came about around 2018, 2019 maybe, when my MailChimp list outgrew the free plan. And the last thing I wanted with a side gig was another monthly cost just to send out a newsletter once in a while. So somewhere along the way, I stumbled onto Substack, and I'm pretty sure it was from Seth Godin or Derek Sivers. Whoever it was, I owe them a beer between sauna rounds because I've been at it ever since. I publish monthly and what I call anchor reporting, a clean, once-a-month summary of all the shenanigans happening in my sauna life and across the wider ecosystem. And that includes building and design insights, guest posts from like-minded thermal enthusiasts, sauna events and field reports, reflections on sauna culture. We have the sauna circuits that are launching at least one, if not two a month. Practical takeaways you can actually use with all of this stuff. It's drawn from decades of building, bathing, observing, and paying attention to this thing we all share that's certainly older than most all of us combined, probably. So if you subscribe, that's what you'll get. And if you want to go deeper, there's a paid option where I share more in-depth writing, behind-the-scenes insights, and where Sauna Times is headed. You can find it at saunatimes.substack.com. If sauna means something to you, you'll feel right at home there. So we were speaking about the connection between the physical and the mental aspects of sauna. And we were talking about this journey that we can take together, on the bench.
Yeah.
And I'd love for you to speak a little bit more about the connection with the physical and the mental. We can, in your book, you speak really eloquently about neurotransmitters and what happens in the brain and that kind of thing. But you were talking about sauna days and the culture of bathing and this event right here.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that I've found that oftentimes people I've sat next to on a sauna bench or encountered in this context have quite a number of them have become friends. And good friends, like quickly. It's really interesting, and I think there's something intimate about sweating together. Obviously, it's pretty, especially in our society where sweating is stigmatized, right? but not with us.
Yeah.
We like to sweat together.
People like us do things like this.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
But in your book, it's so wonderful, this training you did with Hotter Than Hell 100.
Yeah.
Did you find a similarity there where, we'll talk a little bit about your training, which is fascinating. But when we talk about this journey we take together, where you were riding with others, right? And then when we're sitting on the bench, we're going through that together. Like, did you find a correlation there about going through a process together and in the social bonds that happen?
Well, back to your mental and physical thing. Like, I think the bottom line is the mind-body connection can be mediated through heat, and so that's kind of one model I have for it. But so I'll explain the athletic side. The Hotter Than Hell 100 is a bike ride. It's like a mass bike ride, a century ride in Texas. It's probably should never have been created because you're riding 100 miles in August and it's 100 degrees. Nobody should sign up for this thing, but thousands of people do. I think I did it in 2023, and I think there were like 9,000 riders, and it was one of the hottest years. Texas was 108 degrees for the entire summer. That part of Texas, Wichita Falls, cool little town. And so you think, like, that's not something I ever want to do, right? And that's not something I ever could do. But I signed up anyway, because I'm a little bit, I like to push myself, and part of this project meant leaning into something that was uncomfortable and that I thought I didn't like, and turned out I did. And so I went to the Corey Stringer Institute at the University of Connecticut, and they have a really sophisticated heat lab there, and they study heat tolerance in workers, which is a really important subject with climate change and, the Amazonification of work. A lot of people working in warehouses that get quite hot. And they work with athletes. And so I convinced them, I hope they're not sorry, but I convinced them to let me go through their testing and training program. So I went in for a heat tolerance test, and they cranked the heat up to about 100 degrees, 40% humidity, put me on a janky stationary bike with a rectal probe, the things I do for... Yeah. And I'm riding away for an hour, and I just about died. Like, my temperature was going up and up and up and up, and, like, I just felt like I was gonna die. And then the guy, Rob Huggins, looked at me. It was like, with pity, just like, man, you're in big trouble. So, long story short, I went through a whole summer of not just athletic training, fitness training, but something called heat training. And heat training is similar to sauna, but without a sauna, and it takes more effort. So that means basically doing work, you're running or you're exercising in a hot environment, but for like a limited period of time, and you're monitoring your body temperature. And again, the goal is to get your body temperature up a little bit for a little bit of time, and then you do that over and over again, and these physiological adaptations take place.
And that's the key word, adaptation, right?
We're so adaptable.
Yeah. Great.
It's quite incredible.
And how long was that training from your first debacle, like when you're in big trouble?
It was only 2 months.
Okay.
And even in that period, I mean, you can do it. You can do heat acclimation training in like 2 weeks. With like 8 or 9 sessions. Interestingly, this goes back to like the gold mines of South Africa, and as the mines got deeper, I think I said this on our other session, the mines got hotter, and so they had to figure out how to protect these guys finally, because originally they thought, all black people are great in the heat, and then they started dying. So oops. And, gold production stopped. Yeah. Big problem. Yeah. That was the big problem. Yeah. So,
people are dying. Our production is down. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
It's not a humanity thing. It's an economic thing.
Yeah. But it led to this interesting sports science discovery that ended up saving lives. And they, smartly hired a doctor to test these workers for heat tolerance. And then the cure, if you're intolerant to heat, the cure is heat, which is also crazy to think about. So
counterintuitive in a way, maybe, but...
So they'd have the guys like shovel rocks in a hot tent for an hour or so, and then you do that depending on their level of, how badly they flunked the heat test. Do it 5 times, do it 8 times, do it 14 times, and then they'd be okay. They'd have a level of, rather than just throwing them in to the mines and seeing what happens. So, say what we will about, mine owners, they're more enlightened than, certainly North American law, like American law. Like there's no heat safety standard in all the, worker safety codes that we have. There's no protection.
Yeah,
so they just throw workers into these situations.
Totally. And on a side, you reference how they bring water in to keep the dust down, and that adds humidity level.
Humidity. Yeah. So it's like you're schwitzing. I mean, it's like it's a very oppressive environment.
I get it. So that work you did, or that training you did, again, adaptation, and it got you ready, and you enjoyed this. You enjoyed your time with the hotter than hell 100.
I survived. I mean,
Okay.
It was one of the hottest years they've ever had.
Yeah.
And I got out there, and I was really worried the night before, and I called my coach. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. And then I get out there, and people were struggling. Like it's an intense thing. By about the third rest stop, 30 miles in, folks are like starting to kind of conk out. Not conk out, but like they're starting to struggle. And I felt pretty good.
Yeah.
Like I felt fine
Because of adaptation, mental and
adaptation
physical.
And mentally. I think I had decided that I could do it, and I didn't feel as bad as I thought I would, and I felt strong, and I paced myself. So the key thing in heat, everything slows down. If you're talking about like physical activity, you're not like doing jumping jacks,
right?
In a sauna, unless you're at Othership. Which I love. I love Othership. So everything slows down, so you got to pace yourself. I think that's the key.
Yeah. Brilliant. Let's go back to your work with Dr. Jari Laukkanen, and in studying his seminal work.
Yeah.
Put it that way. And we want to just kind of revisit that a little bit, because like we were joking about here, is if we had a dollar for every time that study was referenced, it would add up quite a bit.
Well, Jari should get the dollar.
Exactly. Yeah, well said. Yeah. And part of that also is that the study wasn't. Look, I've had him on the show, and I've researched and that work in its own way. But it took your book for me to really get it in deeper context, and you did a remarkable job of really peeling the onion back. That this wasn't a sauna study.
No, and you could never get funding to go do a 20-year sauna study, but so it almost happened by accident. But they had Finland had a real problem with middle-aged guys, especially dropping dead of heart attacks. It was a pretty unhealthy country. There was no vegetables, there was no EU. A
lot of smoking.
Bad Russian cigarettes and vodka, I think, was a problem. And so they did a huge study looking at every aspect of these guys' lives, 2,400 of them, 2,300 some, and they had them do like a 10-page questionnaire, very detailed, what they ate, like what they ate yesterday, what they ate, how much of this, that, or the other thing, looking for these associations between behaviors or physical biomarker profiles like cholesterol and habits like smoking, how much money they made, who they lived with, and then they asked about sauna. How often do you use sauna? And of course it's Finland, so how long do you stay in? How hot is it? Do you go 4 times a week? Do you go 1 time a week?
And if
it's
it
like
was
asking,
yeah,
it's like how often do you take a shower?
Yeah, an American study would be that.
Or do you take a shower or a bath?
Right.
And then you look 20 years later and you find that there's big difference. And so that's what Jari did. He became the director of this. He became the director of this study. And then he liked sauna, and he's an athlete himself. He's actually an excellent amateur cross-country skier. So they teased out the sauna data and compared it to outcomes of these guys, and they found that they were about half as likely, or 40% as likely, to have a fatal heart attack, half the rate of all-cause mortality over the 20 years, about half the rate of strokes. And that's an incredible finding. I mean, there's not a drug that does that. Maybe exercise does that over 20 years, possibly, but a really potent effect. And so that came out in 2015. And that's the study that everybody talks about.
The association between physical and mental, I'd like to visit with that again and just get your take on it and lead us into that through your journey in the door opening for you in sauna. You're in Utah. Is this pre-COVID when you really caught the bug, or
this was sort of shortly after?
Okay.
Yeah. And it was a cold winter, and I had been through a really difficult, work experience that left me a little bit. It was a little bit crushing, to be honest. And I had free time, so I would go to the gym, and then I'd go to let's go to the sauna, sit in there, 10 minutes, and like my muscles felt good, but at the same time, like my mind would kind of like relax, would kind of like unclench, right? Because I'm a little tightly wound, and I had all this stuff I was thinking about, the hangover from the work thing. And that would just kind of release. I'd do that, and I'd go in the cold shower, and I'd go home, and I'd be like, okay,
like a reset button?
Yeah, boom, it was a reset button, exactly. It's like, wow, that's really interesting. And I was aware of the Jari studies because they'd come up in my longevity research, and so I decided to revisit those and really look into them and kind of start talking to people in this world of heat science. And it turns out that he's published dozens of papers based on this data. Not only the cardiovascular benefits, but there's a huge effect on Alzheimer's disease. About 2/3 reduction in the rate of Alzheimer's disease of these guys. That's a massive finding.
Yeah, and all cause mortality, cardiovascular, with that.
Yeah,
and he's a cardiologist.
No, and he's a cardiologist, so that's why he's so.
But what drew you there was mental as much as physical.
Yeah, it really was. And then it turned out, through this long journey. It's interesting. I think about. At the time, I thought about physical aging mostly, and the aging process. I've written books about that.
Yeah.
I wrote going back to 2015. I wrote a book called Spring Chicken. Right when these studies came out, looking at the science of aging. But then it turned out that anyway, the journey led to this idea of its effect on the mind. That heat does something, heat and maybe cold, does something to the mind. And actually, Jari Laukkanen and his colleagues found that the frequent sauna users also had a much lower rate of psychotic episodes in their life. So much better mental health outcomes. And this was about an 80% reduction in that.
And in your book, you speak about that, like from the neurotransmitters that are what happens in the brain.
Yeah, so they've done some. So these folks that work with Chuck Raison and Ashley Mason, they've done a little bit of digging and using animal models, and they've found that, at least in animals, they've found that heating them up activates a specific brain region that produces serotonin. So these neurons that produce serotonin. So it's exactly the same as heating these animals up, giving them a fever essentially, does almost the same thing that antidepressants are supposed to do, or SSRI drugs are supposed to do. But it's an innate mechanism. And that's really fascinating.
Totally. So that's the book. It was such a wonderful read, and so I have to let you guys in behind the curtain a little bit, those listening. When Bill and I were talking about converging here, where we are in New York City for the Culture of Bathing gathering, leading up to this, Bill was kind enough to send me an advance copy of the book, and he's texting me, he says, hey, be sure to read the preface and chapter 1, chapter 3 is good. I found myself reading every word, it's so well written, it flows so well, and I want to compliment you on how you web in the Hotter Than Hell 100, because that you come back to that, you get nerdy about the science, but I'm
a nerd.
You are a nerd, but
I'm a fun nerd.
You are a fun nerd because you're a practical nerd. You're talking about your journey into the heat.
Well, how to apply this stuff, I think, is interesting, and how to make your life, whether you're an athlete or a city person, or you're going through a stressful period.
Yeah,
it's how to apply it, I think, is important,
and how we relate to that. And sauna is a subset of heat stress, and you're very clear about that also in the book. And yet, as a sauna nut, like probably most of the listeners on this episode are, it takes us into a little bit bigger umbrella than just sweat bathing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think they're all connected, and I think it's basically, in science they call it a phenotype. It's basically like what you are physically, phenotype is like being tall, right? And being sort of adapted to heat is something that sauna aficionados, they're heat adapted, right? And a lot of athletes, heat adaptation is mandatory for athletes now. Olympic athletes, you have to do it, because these events, even the Twin Cities Marathon, I think it got canceled a few years ago because it was so hot. So
with climate change,
runners and cyclists, and the weather's less predictable. And Olympic athletes, the Olympics are in a hotter place. So anyway, heat adaptation is mandatory for athletes, and a lot of it, they use sauna. They're Olympic marathon runners out near where I live, out in Utah. The top 2 guys in the country, and they go to sauna after their runs, religiously, and that extends the workout. So it's really a convergence. It's really the same thing. Sauna's a great way to access some cardiovascular benefits, some mental health benefits, and for people who don't or can't exercise, and especially older people. So our Healing Heroes, this is a nonprofit organization based in Minnesota where I live, and involved with those guys, doing wonderful work about providing sauna for veterans, for our veterans, and some of them have had, amputees with limb, some cannot exercise, and sauna has just been like the perfect mechanism for those folks, formerly really active folks, to get their heart rate up, heart rate variability, and so it's a piece of a puzzle that gets reintroduced for these folks, and they're finding great physical and mental benefits through sauna. At one point I did a backyard sweat lodge in Draper, Utah. This guy made a homemade sweat lodge, and a bunch of veterans were there, and they go every week to this thing.
And here we get to revisit the connection between mind and body, right? And the social and the physical.
Yeah.
And the idea here, the unintended benefit, we talk about Ashley Mason's work in her study, where all of a sudden these introverted people who have, they're suffering mentally and have signed up for this study are finding a common bond socially.
And weirdly, in some of these studies, they've found that like they pull people out of the heat. They're done with the heat, and they start like chatting away, like chat.
Yeah.
Like even me, like I'm a little bit surprisingly, I can be a little bit quiet, introverted myself, and I finished I participated in a similar study that they were running in Colorado. It's really interesting. It was the sauna and the cold plunge, and she still like teases me about it. Like, man, you were really chatty when you got out of there. Like, it was really quiet when I went in.
Yeah.
And then I come out and I'm like, blah, 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 blah.
It's about, breaking the pattern of being introverted. And now all of a sudden there's a safe space, so to speak, right? And so it's brilliant. And a couple fun questions. You okay on time?
Fun questions, yeah.
Yeah, you cool?
Yeah,
you got a couple more minutes?
Questions, yeah.
So, it's a sauna day for you. You wake up and you know it's going to be a sauna day. What's your favorite moment? Like even from your waking up, the anticipation, round one, first, water over your head, first swim, going to bed at night. Like if you think about the whole day that's involved with sauna for you, if you had to distill, what would be what comes to mind first is one of your favorite moments through the whole idea of a sauna day for you?
I mean, I think the thing that makes me feel the best is knowing that I'm going to take, an hour or whatever, and for myself, or with, like I would go with my son before he went off to college, and we're just going to take this time and do something that's, relaxing and fun, and there's not a phone, But I think settling into the heat, into the hot room, and like taking your spot, and like those first few minutes, and you're just kind of slowly warming up, and your muscles kind of relax, and your mind starts to, and you kind of exhale, and it's like that feels good. And then last night, yesterday was a huge sauna day. Last night we'd done a bunch of rounds and had a great time. Had a couple beers, and then got back to the hotel. I was like, okay, I'm gonna thinking like I'll just go upstairs and then I'll come down and socialize. And I get up there like, man, I have not been this relaxed in weeks. Yeah. And so I just called my partner and went to bed.
That's what I did too.
So relaxed.
Yeah. Like I didn't want to spoil it, to keep that momentum going. Yeah. It's and the other bit to that is like I have this line of good heat knows no borders, and part of that is the universality of this place we go, and you get on the bench and it's a comfort reminder of our sauna at home, or
definitely.
My sauna experience in Norway, sitting next to Stig from the Oslo Norwegian Sauna Association. This idea about this commonality of microclimate.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that so many different cultures have traditionally done some form of this, and not just, heat, but like hot springs, right? Those were special places for the Native Americans. And then it's, growing and spreading beyond its traditional homes in different forms. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting to me.
Yeah, another question I ask all guests, and I'm going to frame it for you, in context of your research and the work you did in putting together Hotwired, what do you think about sauna that is most misunderstood, that you would like others to know about or to share? Like if you could share that with a large audience.
Well, I think there are people who are in a place kind of where I was 5-10 years ago, when you think of it as like this exotic thing. You think of it as like a kind of uncomfortable thing, or something you that's painful. And, that's kind of how I thought of it, honestly. Going back years, right? And I think leaning into that thing that you think you might not like can be surprising.
Yeah.
You might still not like it. And this is for the newbies who probably aren't listening to your show. But, we all have friends. Like, I have family members who think, like my brother, right, who lives here, he thinks I'm insane. Like, why would you do that? Or I have, colleagues who, journalist colleagues who are like, they're like, I'm like, do you want to come sauna? I'm like, no.
Yeah. Right.
No way.
Right. Well, one of my...
So bring them along. Drag them along.
Well, they used to make fun of us, but now they all want a seat on the bench. And I think more and more...
Now they want to be us.
Yeah. That's right. It's cool.
And I'm a novice still. I'm new to this.
Yeah.
World, so.
Within Hotwired, like if you had to kind of... I consider your book not a sauna book. It's a heat exposure book, and you also have a chapter on cold, which I'd love to ask you about that before we leave. But my first question is, if you had to kind of attribute sauna as a subset of the work you did for Hotwired, as a percent or as a slice of a pie, I mean, if you could frame that up for us.
It was like the fun slice of the pie.
Okay.
It's probably, it's like the linchpin, really. I mean, it's the thing that makes it not just like a sports book. Mm-hmm. And it was the thing that led to this sort of interesting mental health. Mm-hmm. So the book is a funny animal, and it was tough to come up with a cover for it and a title, because it melds all these different things. But I think sauna's maybe 40% if you wanted to percentify it. But it's really the glue that kind of holds it together. Yeah,
and you bring cold into the book as well. Do you want to speak to that chapter?
Yeah. Well, that's the chapter you're in, Glenn.
Yeah.
You're my cold plunging Sherpa. I'll just be blunt and say, cold plunging is not my favorite thing, and I was kind of looking for reasons not to like it, or to dismiss it a little bit. And I feel like the science of cold is way behind the science of heat. There's no Jari Laukkanen for cold. So the studies are small. They tend to be a little bit biased, to be honest. There are people who either love it or hate it. And then just there's not this data for this robust long-term effect, because that study hasn't been done and probably can't be done. That said, probably a lot of these Finnish guys in Jari's study, some of them were doing a cold in addition to their sauna. So that's something. But back to my point about blood flow. You jump in the cold, your blood flow shuts down. It all goes to your core.
Heart rate goes way down.
Yeah. And if you think about if you've just done a big workout, right, and your muscles are recovering from that, and you get in the cold and you're shutting down the blood flow. So that's not good for your, people say it's for recovery. It's really not good for recovery. And they've done studies where they have people work out, then they throw them in the cold, and they find that through these fancy techniques, they find that muscle protein synthesis kind of shuts down. So you're not rebuilding muscle after your workout as much. So that's something to think about for folks. That said, there are reasons to do it. And I think a lot of them have to do with how it makes you mentally. It's like a mental charge. You get a
huge endorphins. But
norepinephrine, all these things seem to go up. It wakes you up. Back in the day, at these old time mental hospitals, they would take mentally ill patients and kind of walk them around, and then they would open a trap door, and they would drop them into basically a cold plunge, cold water, dunk them in cold water, and that would shock them out of their whatever mental state they were in.
Yeah.
And so I think about that. Like there's probably something to that.
Lovely. Okay, so when I go through a hole in the ice or into the 30 whatever degrees Fahrenheit, where my mind goes is like, okay, I don't think about that moment because it's not fun. I think about how good I'm going to feel after.
Yeah.
Kind of like banging your head against the wall. Boy, does that feel good when you stop.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I do a lot of like kind of masochistic things. Like on the bike or whatever. I did the Hotter and Hell 100. That felt good when it stopped. I feel like, I don't know, I'm a little bit against the kind of militant, timed cold plunge. How long can you stay in? Who's tougher?
Yeah.
And most cold plunges, honestly, are too cold. Honestly, I think the physiological benefits happen in like the 50s Fahrenheit. So 10 to 15 Celsius. And they're always too cold, and it becomes this like, I'm not allowed to say like dick swinging contest.
No, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
the sauna bros.
It's the ultimate sauna bro contest. Like who can stick it out.
Yeah.
And that's a stereotype.
No, it is.
I'm
but
a sauna bro too.
A lot of athletes come to this contrast therapy as a mechanism for, performance, and that whole system is based on a stopwatch and gauging.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that going.
Yeah, but we really don't know. We don't know like optimal dosage of sauna. Certainly, like people extrapolate from the Jari studies and say, oh, you have to be in for 19 minutes at 180 degrees or hotter. And these guys answered this questionnaire once, and then like. How many of your habits from 20 years ago do you exactly replicate now, right? So you're assuming that they still went to hot saunas for 19 minutes or more, 4 to 7 days a week. Mm-hmm. We don't know.
Yeah.
And that study hasn't been done. So the protocol, you can't really come up with a precise protocol.
Yeah, my
you have to
favorite.
Listen to yourself.
Dude, you totally nailed it. That's my protocol. Is you know when the time to leave the hot room is?
Not the first moment you want to leave, but you got to go beyond that, right?
Yeah, when the idea of an ice cold lake plunge is the best idea you've ever heard.
That's perfect.
That's a nod to Clint. Clint coined that one at least 10 years ago, and that's where my mind goes, right? Like, there's another thing, and I got a couple more quick questions. Okay, two more questions, but this idea about knowing your body, right?
Yeah.
And it's okay to be a low bench Larry, like if you're feeling it, but your core isn't right then. Go down low, a little more humidity, a little less heat, and I think that's part of the release that we all have an opportunity to know where we are. Two last questions.
Well, so
go ahead.
I'm going to jump on that because, I think one thing that these practices do is they kind of reconnect you with your body and understanding how your body's feeling, similar to the way athletes kind of naturally are. And also, I would also say, you don't have to cold plunge if you don't feel like it. And if you're stressed out, it's a very stressful experience. So, and especially, I'll say like for women, have less body mass, less muscle mass. I would imagine, I haven't confirmed this, but it would heat up a lot more, and I think be more sensitive to long sessions in cold, just because they're generally smaller. Mm-hmm. So it's not one size fits all.
Yeah,
also.
And listen to your core, not your skin, is another great lesson. Is a lot of people jackrabbit their sauna rounds. They're in and out, especially on a windy day. Like, if you're in a climate area.
Yesterday.
Yeah, right. I noticed even I was not completely
it was cold down by the
so I go back into another round and my core is still hot. And but anyway, so I love that idea of the rubber band, the expansion, the fully hot and the fully cooled down. Two last questions.
Okay.
Mobile sauna. We were in many last night. Mobile saunas.
Yeah.
If you could have a mobile sauna in a dream world, what's the first place that comes to mind where you would like to bring a mobile sauna?
So I would like to bring a mobile sauna up to one of my favorite places in the world, which is Alta Ski Area in Utah. And I'd park it and I'd fire it up and I'd go skiing and I'd come back and anybody who wanted to could come in.
Oh, beautiful. And that was the second part of my question is, you're there. Who is the first person that comes to mind that you would like to welcome on the bench with you? Dead or alive, past, present, famous, not famous?
Oh.
Who pops into your head first?
Well, my partner Martha is part Finnish, so she has to be first on the list. Who else? I think my dad, and he's having some health challenges and he's older. But that would have been a fun thing to do with him.
Beautiful. Take us out, Bill. Thanks for being a part of Sauna Talk. Any final word to listeners? Where to find the book, or even a little lesson you learned along in your journey?
Yeah, I mean, the book is called Hotwired. It's at all the usual places. Hopefully it's in your local bookstore. If not, it's on Amazon. I think the biggest thing I learned is that if you lean into something that is uncomfortable to you or outside your comfort zone, I think, and kind of stop intellectualizing about it and just kind of follow your feelings and just understand how you feel about it, you can surprise yourself and learn a lot.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Sauna Talk podcast. For even more content and discussion of all things sauna, visit saunatimes.com. That's where you'll find articles, resources, and the stories that keep the sauna culture moving forward. You can also connect with me, Glenn Auerbach, on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Substack. If you're interested in live events, workshops, or local and regional sauna circuits, you'll find those details on the website as well. Finally, if you represent a brand aligned with authentic sauna culture and would like to explore partnership or sponsorship opportunities, I'd love to connect. Reach out through saunatimes.com and let's start the conversation. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, I'll see you on the bench.